The quantum engines of the diplomatic vessel Harmonious Accord hummed at a frequency designed to soothe the nervous systems of 17 different sentient species. Ambassador Vursk found it nauseating. "Approaching Earth orbit in approximately 22 minutes, announced the navigation system in the blandly pleasant tone that had become standard on all galactic cooperation vessels. Vrisk suspected humans had designed that voice algorithm too. They seem to have their manipulative fingers in everything these days. Another welcoming committee of unarmed cultural vessels, Commander Zix-9 reported from the tactical station, mandibles clicking with barely disguised contempt. No weapon signatures, not even basic deflector shields, just music broadcasts and something called refreshments. Vrisk unfurled his sensory tendrils, allowing them to absorb the electromagnetic data streaming from the holographic displays. The approaching Earth vessels looked as harmless as newborn Quillian pups. Colourful, decorative, and about as threatening as a warm breeze. "They mock us with this display," Minister Cald muttered, her crystalline form refracting the cabin lights into prismatic patterns across the bridge. "Their so-called diplomatic fleet consists of party barges." Dr. Thune swiveled his bulbous eye cluster toward his colleagues. "Perhaps they simply prioritize different expressions of interspecies engagement. My research indicates—" "Your research," interrupted Vursk, "fails to explain how a species barely 3 centuries into faster-than-light travel now maintains cultural outposts on 47 worlds across 3 spiral arms." He gestured toward the viewing portal, where Earth hung like a blue-white marble against the void. "They have no significant military presence beyond their home system. Their technological development lags behind the Merct by at least a century, yet somehow human cuisine is served in the presidential palace on Draxus Prime. Human music echoes through the sacred chambers of the Hive Concordance. The Grand Sovereign of Rigel 6 wears clothing designed by a human from a place called Mil. Commander Zix-9 flexed his battle carapace. "We should have quarantined their world when we first detected their primitive radio signals, standard protocol for potentially disruptive species." The diplomatic corps overruled military recommendation, Dr. Hume reminded him. Humans displayed unusual creative potential. The predictive algorithm suggested they might contribute valuable cultural innovations. "And now look where we are," hissed Kules. "My economic forecasts show 17 previously stable trading partners shifting resources to obtain human luxury goods. The Kerplex have reduced dilithium exports by 30% since becoming obsessed with something called Broadway shows." Vrisk settled his primary mass into the command chair. "Which is precisely why the Council dispatched our delegation. We must understand the mechanism of this influence." The bridge fell silent as the delegates contemplated their mission. Through the viewport, Earth grew steadily larger. "Ambassador," said Commander Zix-9, breaking the silence, "have you reviewed the personnel files on the human representatives scheduled to meet us?" Vrisk gestured affirmatively. "Thoroughly unremarkable. A collection of what they call cultural attachés, artists, chefs, musicians, historians. Not a military or intelligence operative among them, according to our scans." Dr. Thune burbled thoughtfully, a sign of skepticism among his species. "That defies logical analysis. How does a planetary government exert such extensive influence using only civilian cultural representatives?" "The humans call it soft power," offered a new voice. Lieutenant Nix had entered the bridge silently, her feline grace making her an excellent addition to any diplomatic team requiring stealth. "They claim to value cultural exchange over military posturing. My predecessor spent 3 standard cycles studying their diplomatic approach and reported finding no evidence of covert operations or manipulation." "And where is your predecessor now?" asked Vursk. Lieutenant Nix blinked her large golden eyes. She requested permanent reassignment to Earth as a cultural liaison. She now operates something called a jazz club in New Orleans. Minister Kjols emitted a crystalline tone of alarm. Another conversion. This pattern repeats across multiple contacts. Diplomatic personnel exposed to humans frequently request reassignment to Earth or Earth-allied worlds. They abandon centuries of service to pursue hobbies. Precisely the problem, said Vursk. This mission is not merely diplomatic. The Council needs answers. Earth should be a minor player in galactic politics, yet somehow they exert disproportionate influence while maintaining the appearance of harmlessness. Commander Zake's 9 mandibles clicked rapidly. A sign of agitation. Perhaps we should consider a direct approach. Military reconnaissance instead of this diplomatic charade? Denied, said Vrisk firmly. The last 3 species who attempted forceful information extraction from humans suffered embarrassing defeats. Not through military confrontation, but through economic sanctions and cultural isolation that left their populations demanding regime change. The Dravidi hegemony collapsed after humans simply stopped exporting something called coffee bean. The navigation system chimed. Entering standard orbit, Earth Diplomatic Corps requests docking procedures commence. Dr. Thune extruded a manipulator appendage toward the communications array. Fascinating. The welcome transmission includes personalized cultural recommendations for each delegation member based on our species-specific preferences. They have apparently composed music that resonates with crystalline harmonic patterns for Minister Q's. Kells vibrated with suspicion. How could they possibly know my resonant frequencies? That information is not in any diplomatic database. Perhaps they guessed, suggested Lieutenant Nix. Humans are known for intuitive leaps. Or perhaps, said Vresk, sensory tendrils coiling tightly against his torso, they know far more about us than they should, which brings us to the true purpose of our mission. He activated a secure holographic display visible only to the delegation members present. The Council suspects Earth's cultural program conceals something far more strategic. Each of you has been selected not merely for diplomatic expertise, but for specialized investigative skills. Commander X9's compound eyes gleamed. Combat assessment and threat analysis. Xenoanthropological infiltration techniques, added Dr. Thune. You can manage to recognize a suit of armor at a balcony. Economic pattern recognition and financial intelligence, Minister QL's chimed. Lieutenant Nix simply smiled, revealing pointed teeth. Counterintelligence. Brisk nodded. During this so-called goodwill mission, we will determine the true nature of Earth's influence. If humans are manipulating galactic affairs through these cultural ambassadors, we will discover how. If mind-altering substances or technologies are involved, we will identify them. And if, as some council members fear, we are witnessing the early stages of a uniquely human form of conquest. He left the thought unfinished as the docking clamps engaged with a gentle thud. Begin standard diplomatic protocols, Vrisk instructed. But remember, observe everything. Trust nothing, especially not the refreshments. Through the viewport they could see a reception committee forming in the docking bay. Humans in colorful ceremonial attire, carrying no visible weapons, wearing expressions their briefing materials identified as welcoming smiles. Commander Zix-9 performed a final weapons check, carefully concealing a molecular analyzer within his ceremonial armor. They look so harmless, he muttered. That, said Ambassador Vrisk, as the airlock began to cycle, is precisely what worries the Council. No species achieves this level of galactic influence by accident. These humans are playing a game we do not yet understand, with rules we have not been told. He straightened to his full diplomatic height. And we have 6 planetary rotations to discover what hides behind the facade of Earth's soft power before we report back to the Council. The airlock hissed open, releasing the delegation into the carefully orchestrated warmth of human hospitality. The grand atrium of Earth's interstellar diplomatic center stretched 14 stories overhead, its transparent dome revealing a carefully curated view of North America's most picturesque mountain range. Ambassador Vrisk noted the psychological tactics at play, the deliberate display of natural beauty designed to evoke awe while simultaneously reminding visitors of the resources this single planet possessed. "Magnificent, isn't it?" A human female approached, dressed in what their briefing materials identified as traditional diplomatic attire. Director Kwan, Earth Cultural Exchange Coordinator. "Welcome to the Rocky Mountain Complex." Vrisk performed the appropriate greeting gesture. "The Galactic Council appreciates your hospitality." Director Kwan's lips curved upward. "Please, enjoy yourselves. Tonight is purely social, a chance for our peoples to connect before formal negotiations begin tomorrow." The delegation dispersed according to their predetermined strategy. Commander Zex-9 moved toward the security perimeter, while Dr. Thune gravitated to a cluster of humans discussing art. Minister Kells positioned herself near the economic advisors, her crystalline form deliberately catching the light. Lieutenant Nix remained close to Versk, her enhanced senses cataloguing details. The room contained 78 humans and 32 representatives from aligned worlds, she murmured. "No visible weapons, though I detect numerous electronic devices." "Focus on the cultural ambassadors," Grisk instructed. "Those are the individuals of interest." Across the atrium, a crowd had gathered around a preparation station, where a human male arranged small portions of food on decorative platforms. "That's Chef Daniels," Lieutenant Nix informed him. "His culinary techniques have apparently revolutionized dining on 7 worlds. The Gorlax revolution was attributed to his introduction of something called brunch." Versk extended a sensory tendril, sampling the airborne particles. "Fascinating. He combines chemical compounds that trigger pleasure responses across multiple species despite our different biological compositions. A coincidence of evolutionary biology," suggested Lieutenant Nix. "Nothing more sinister than clever flavor combinations." "Perhaps," Brisk conceded, watching as a murked ambassador consumed one of the offered morsels and immediately requested another, though remarkable that a chef understands xenobiology well enough to create universally appealing cuisine. A sudden commotion drew their attention to the center of the room. A human male had taken position before an arrangement of what appeared to be mechanical sound generators. "Maestro Reynolds," announced Director Kwan, "Earth's foremost composer of cross-species harmonics." The human placed his appendages on the instruments, and sound flooded the chamber, complex arrangements of tones that somehow managed to resonate with the neural patterns of diverse species. Risk felt an unwelcome sensation of pleasure as the music activated reward centers in his brain. "Remarkable," Lieutenant Nix whispered. "The harmonics adapt to each species' auditory processing systems. The crystallines are experiencing a completely different composition than we are." "Yes," Blisk agreed, fighting the artificial sense of goodwill the sounds provoked. "One might almost suspect neurological manipulation." A server droid approached, offering beverages. Vrisk accepted, passing his glass discreetly over Lieutenant Nix's scanning device concealed within her ceremonial sash. "No detectable toxins or psychoactive compounds," she confirmed. "Ambassador Vrosk," Commander Zix-9 approached, mandibles arranged in the pattern diplomatically recognized as cordial. "You must sample these remarkable food items. The flavor profiles are extraordinary." Brisk noted the slight change in his security chief's demeanor, the relaxed posture, the uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "You seem impressed by human hospitality." "Merely maintaining cover," Zix9 replied, though his compound eyes remained fixed on the culinary display. "However, I have made an interesting observation. Watch the chef." Versk turned his attention back to Chef Daniels, who continued preparing delicacies with practiced efficiency. Nothing seemed unusual about. The serving droid malfunctioned, tilting dangerously. The platter it carried, loaded with filled crystal vessels, began to slide. In a movement almost too swift to track, Chef Daniels pivoted, one hand shooting out to stabilize the droid while the other caught the platter. Not a single vessel spilled. "Impressive reflexes," Lieutenant Nix remarked, "almost enhanced." "Conduct a passive scan," Versk instructed. "Full biometric profile." Lieutenant Nix adjusted her ceremonial headpiece, activating the scanning technology concealed within. After a moment she reported, "Unusual readings. Muscle density exceeds human baseline by approximately 40%. Cardiovascular system shows signs of substantial modification. Neural activity suggests processing speeds well beyond documented human capability." "A genetic anomaly?" Vrusk suggested. "More like extensive augmentation," Lieutenant Nix replied. His public profile lists no military service, yet his physical capabilities match those of elite combat specialists. Commander Zix9's mandibles clicked softly. "Perhaps we should expand our scans to include other cultural representatives." "Discreetly," Vrusk cautioned. "We must not." "Ambassador!" Director Quan appeared beside them. "I hope you're enjoying the reception. Maestro Reynolds has composed a piece specifically for your species. Would you care to be introduced?" Before Vrisk could respond, the human led them toward the musician, who had just concluded his performance to enthusiastic approval from the assembled diplomats. "Maestro Reynolds," Director Quan said, "may I present Ambassador Vrisk and his delegation from the Galactic Council?" The human turned, extending a hand in the traditional Earth greeting. "An honor, Ambassador. I've studied your species' neurological responses to auditory stimuli extensively. Fascinating how your brain processes harmonic resonance." Vrisk allowed his appendage to make brief contact with the humans. "You possess surprising knowledge of xenoneurology for a musician." A flicker of something, caution perhaps, crossed the human's features before his face resumed its pleasant expression. "A necessary part of my work. One can't compose effectively without understanding the audience." "Indeed," Versk agreed. "And what did you do before becoming a composer?" "This and that," Reynolds responded with a gesture Vrisk's cultural briefing identified as shrugging. "Traveled extensively, studied different cultures. The usual path for a creative professional." Lieutenant Nix casually adjusted her headpiece again. After a moment she inclined her head toward Vrisk, a signal that the scan was complete. Her expression remained neutral, but her tail, visible only to those behind her, twitched in the pattern indicating significant findings. "Your music seems to have a profound effect on diplomatic relations," Vrisk observed. "The Hive Concordance, traditionally resistant to outside influence, has recently constructed concert halls specifically for human performances." Reynolds smiled. "Music transcends differences. It's a universal language." "Universal," Vrisk repeated. "An interesting choice of words for a species that has encountered less than 2% of known sentient civilization." The human's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes changed, a subtle shift from cordial to calculating. "We're eager to meet the rest." A commotion near the entrance drew their attention as Dr. Thune approached, accompanied by a human female whose attire identified her as another cultural ambassador. "Ambassador Vrisk," burbled Dr. Thune excitedly. "Allow me to introduce Professor Lakataus, Earth's foremost authority on comparative mythology. She has offered to show me their Museum of Cultural Evolution tomorrow. How generous, Vrsk replied, noting the way Professor Lakatos moved. Graceful, balanced, with an economy of motion that seemed inconsistent with her academic profile. I trust you'll find it educational. Educational and entertaining, Professor Lakatos assured them. Though, I must warn you, some of our ancient artifacts can be quite shocking to non-human sensibilities. We were a rather competitive species during our development. Competitive? Echoed Commander Zix-9. Tribal conflicts, territorial disputes, Professor Lakatos explained. Ancient history now, of course. We've evolved beyond such primitive behaviors. Of course, Vrsk agreed, though his sensory tendrils detected the subtle pheromonal shifts that indicated deception in most oxygen-breathing species. Director Kwan clapped her hands together. Wonderful. Cultural exchange is the foundation of lasting peace. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must attend to the Draxian delegation. They get rather agitated if their hydration schedule is disrupted. As Director Kwan departed, Lieutenant Nix leaned close to Vrsk, her voice barely audible. Completed scans on both Reynolds and Lakatos, similar results to the chef. Both show evidence of extensive biological enhancements consistent with military-grade augmentation. Reynolds has a subdermal communication implant that doesn't match any civilian model in our database. Interesting, this murmured. And the professor? Even more curious, Lieutenant Nix replied. Her skeletal structure shows evidence of multiple combat injuries that have been expertly repaired. Her public biography mentions no incidents that would explain such trauma. Ambassador! A new voice interjected. They turned to find Chef Daniels approaching with a tray of artfully arranged food items. I've prepared these specifically for your delegation's unique biochemistry. A molecular gastronomy interpretation of traditional dishes from your homeworld. Vrsk regarded the offerings with suspicion. You seem remarkably knowledgeable about my species' culinary preferences. Professional curiosity, Daniels explained. I find that understanding the evolutionary environment of a species provides insight into their food preferences. Your ancestors evolved in brackish swamps, consuming filter-feeding organisms, correct? I've attempted to recreate those flavor profiles using Earth ingredients. Our evolutionary history is not widely documented outside Council archives, Commander Zix-9 noted, mandibles clicking in what humans would mistake for interest rather than alarm. No, Daniels looked genuinely surprised. Perhaps I read it in one of Professor Lakatos's comparative biology texts. She's quite thorough in her research. Quite, agreed Vrsk, accepting one of the offered delicacies. He noted the perfect balance of minerals and proteins, an exact match for the nutritional composition of a rare delicacy from his homeworld. Not an approximation, but a precise duplication that would require intimate knowledge of his species' biochemistry. A chime sounded, indicating the reception was transitioning to its next phase. Director Kwan returned to the center of the room, announcing, "If our honored guests would proceed to the observation deck, Earth's orbital lights are about to align for a spectacular display." As the assembled diplomats moved toward the indicated exits, Vrsk gathered his delegation close. "Initial assessments?" he asked quietly. 3 confirmed targets with military-grade augmentations, Lieutenant Nix reported. Chef Daniels, Maestro Reynolds, and Professor Lakatos all show physical capabilities far beyond standard human parameters. They possess detailed knowledge of our species that exceeds diplomatic briefing materials, added Commander Zix-9. Tactical evaluation suggests specialized training in intelligence gathering. Minister Q's vibrated with concern. The economic representatives asked highly specific questions about resource allocation in frontier systems, information that would be valuable for identifying vulnerabilities in our supply chains. Bethune extended a nervous appendage. "Ambassador, I believe we may have underestimated these humans. Their cultural representatives display knowledge, breadth, and depth consistent with specialized intelligence operatives, not civilian diplomats. Vrisk absorbed these reports, sensory tendrils coiling tightly. We must accelerate our investigation. Tomorrow, each of you will accompany your counterpart on the scheduled cultural tours. Look for evidence of military facilities, training programs, anything that might explain what we're observing. And if we find something, asked Commander Zix-9, document everything, Vrisk instructed. The Council must be informed of what we've discovered. He turned to watch the human cultural ambassadors mingling effortlessly with diplomats from across the galaxy, each conversation precisely calibrated to the interests and psychological profiles of their targets. No longer could he dismiss them as harmless cultural enthusiasts. Their bodies were weapons, their minds tactical instruments, and their friendly demeanor the most effective camouflage he had ever encountered. Come, he said to his delegation, let us observe their light display, and remember, we are no longer attending a diplomatic reception. What are we doing? Lieutenant Nix asked. Reconnaissance, Vers replied, deep in enemy territory. Security Chief Vraz cornered Ambassador Blackwood in the empty corridor outside the Galactic Council chambers. The towering Drenthi official loomed with all four arms crossed, blocking the path. Care to explain these documents, Ambassador? Vraz slid a datapad across the polished marble. Your diplomatic selection protocols make fascinating reading. Blackwood glanced at the classified Earth documents without a hint of surprise. The human took a sip from a steaming cup, eyes never leaving the security chief. Seems you have questions about our recruitment process, Blackwood stated flatly. I wonder what part confused you most, the endurance trials or the psychological evaluations? Vraz flicked through the documents with a talon. The section where your candidates are abandoned in wilderness zones without supplies for weeks? Or perhaps the combat efficiency rankings that somehow correlate with negotiation success rates? The human diplomat shrugged. Different species have different methods. The Morvellians select diplomats based on tentacle sensitivity. The Prath use scent recognition. We prefer practical assessments. You train killers and call them diplomats, Vras hissed, lower mandibles clicking in agitation. Blackwood placed the cup down carefully. Interesting conclusion. Rather than debate, perhaps a demonstration would clarify matters. My team is conducting a training exercise tomorrow. Consider yourself invited. Dawn broke over the planetary training grounds, designated Outpost 7. Vraz arrived to find 6 human diplomats stretching casually beside a ravine that dropped nearly a kilometer into darkness. Welcome to our morning routine. Blackwood nodded toward the assembled humans. Nothing special, just basic diplomatic preparation. Before Vraz could respond, the humans launched themselves into the ravine, using barely visible handholds to descend the near-vertical rock face. Their movements were unnervingly precise. Not the desperate scrabbling of prey species, but the calculated efficiency of something that evolved to hunt along cliff edges. This represents diplomatic training. How exactly? Vraz asked, watching as the humans navigated seemingly impossible passages. Pattern recognition, answered a voice behind them. A grey-hailed human approached, wearing simple exercise clothes that did nothing to hide old scars. Ambassador Blackwood mentioned you had questions. Director Chan, Blackwood acknowledged with a respectful nod. The cliff face changes daily, Director Chan explained. Natural erosion, temperature fluctuations. Adapting to these changes requires the same mental framework as adapting to shifting political landscapes. Those who can identify patterns survive. Those who rely on memorized paths fall. As if on cue, one of the climbers made a spectacular leap across an opening, grabbing a handhold that Vraz hadn't even noticed existed. Their diplomat just negotiated a peace treaty between the Altarian hegemony and 3 splinter factions, Chan noted casually. Same principles: identify weaknesses, recognize opportunities, commit fully when the moment arrives. They moved to the next training area, where humans were engaged in something more disturbing, fighting each other with blunted weapons while simultaneously debating complex ethical problems. Your mind performs best under controlled stress, Chan said, watching 2 diplomats circle each other with weighted batons. The ambassador currently defending deontological ethics will soon shift his argument pattern. His opponent is favoring her right leg, a weakness he'll exploit, verbally and physically. Vraz felt his exoskeleton chill. You're conditioning them to identify anatomical weaknesses while engaging in philosophical discourse? We condition them to process multiple threatening inputs simultaneously while maintaining cognitive clarity, Chan corrected. The galaxy is dangerous, Security Chief. Negotiations happen under threat more often than not. Blackwood guided them to a viewing platform overlooking an environmental chamber where the atmosphere shifted visibly between toxic swirls and breathable air. Inside, human diplomats in minimal protection moved with practiced precision, reaching safety zones seconds before lethal gas pockets passed through. The Nargrathin trade accords, Blackwood noted. Negotiations lasted 17 hours in a compromised life support environment. Every species present needed full environmental suits except the Nargrathins themselves. And us. Your species should have died, Vraz stated bluntly. Chan smiled. Many diplomats would have. Ours recognized the gas release patterns and adapted. They signed the accords while their counterparts were being evacuated. Coincidentally, we secured exclusive mining rights. Later, they observed humans in a combat simulator fighting against holographic opponents who used shifting tactics. What disturbed Vraz most wasn't the violence. It was how the humans anticipated moves, countering attacks before they fully formed. The same neural pathways that let us predict a prey animal's escape route let us predict negotiation tactics, Blackwood explained. We know what you'll offer before you do. Are you threatening me, Ambassador? Vraz asked quietly. Simply explaining evolutionary advantages. The predator must anticipate. The prey simply react. Their tour ended in a command center, where a wall of screens displayed unfolding crises across 17 systems. The Turian blockade, the Kartian uprising, the Melt Zone conflicts. Speaking of which, Chan said, gesturing toward an incoming transmission. It seems the collective has just deployed warships to the Epsilon corridor. They're threatening to destroy any vessels attempting passage. The room fell silent as the implications settled. The Epsilon corridor was the only viable route between 3 galactic arms. Its closure would strand billions and trigger economic collapse across multiple sectors. I'm activating all diplomatic teams, Chan announced. Blackwood, you'll lead the Epsilon delegation. Raz watched in stunned silence as the room transformed, diplomatic predators shifting into coordinated action, analyzing threat patterns, identifying pressure points. Their eyes showed the same focused attention Raz had seen in Apex Hunters across a dozen worlds. Still think we're just killers with fancy titles? Blackwood asked quietly. No, Vraz admitted. You're something far more dangerous. You're killers who've learned restraint not from weakness, but as a superior hunting strategy. As warning klaxons sounded throughout the facility, Blackwood smiled with teeth that suddenly seemed sharper than before. Exactly. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a peace to negotiate. The Epsilon Corridor crisis reached its zenith aboard the neutral station Proxima Nexus. 17 species gathered in the Grand Chamber, atmosphere thick with pheromones, radiation signatures, and unspoken threats. The collective delegation occupied the eastern quadrant, weapon limbs barely concealed beneath ceremonial shrouds. Their Admiral Negotiator Quell dominated the room, with bioluminescent threat displays pulsing beneath translucent skin. "The corridor belongs to those strong enough to hold it," Quell announced, voice modulator projecting across all auditory spectrums. "The collective has decided. Resistance means obliteration." Blackwood entered last, flanked by 3 human diplomats. They wore simple grey uniforms without adornment, no medals, no weapons, no visible technology. To most species present, they appeared almost pathetically vulnerable. Security Chief Vraz observed from the monitoring station, alongside Dr. Zelt, whose recently published paper, Predatory Diplomacy, the Human Paradox, had caused uproar across academic channels. "Watch their positioning," Zelt whispered. "Classic pack-hunting formation." The humans moved with casual precision, one stationed near the environmental controls, another beside the communications array. Blackwood approached the central platform, while the 4th diplomat positioned herself near the collective delegation. Admiral Negotiator Quell focused compound eyes on Blackwood. "The human arrives unarmed. Perhaps your species truly deserves extinction." "Weapons complicate conversations," Blackwood replied, voice unnervingly calm. "And we prefer talking. For now." What followed was not merely negotiation, but a masterclass in predatory psychology. The humans never raised their voices, never threatened. Instead, they maneuvered the conversation with devastating precision. When the Zarkothi representatives suggested capitulation, the human near the communications panel subtly shifted position. Within moments, the Zarkothi received intelligence about collective fleet movements near their homeworld. When the Fraxian matriarch proposed a compromise that favored the collective, the human, by environmental controls, adjusted something imperceptible. The chamber temperature shifted 2 degrees, unnoticeable to most, but precisely targeting Fraxian thermal discomfort thresholds. "They created pressure points without anyone noticing," Vraz observed. Zelt nodded. "Classic ambush predator technique. Change the environment to disadvantage prey while remaining comfortable yourself." The collective admiral grew increasingly agitated as previous allies subtly withdrew support. Blackwood never attacked directly, instead creating spaces for the admiral to blunder into prepared verbal traps. "The corridor will remain open," Blackwood finally stated. "Your forces will withdraw. The collective will receive preferential transit rights and reduced taxation for 80 cycles." "Or what?" hissed the admiral. Blackwood smiled. The same expression Vraz had seen on the training grounds, not a social gesture, but a predator baring teeth. "Or nothing. We continue talking while your fleet remains deployed, burning resources, crews growing restless." Meanwhile, 3 separate trade consortiums are currently rerouting supply chains around collective space permanently. Your economic forecasts project collapse within 6 cycles without those trade routes. The Admiral's bioluminescence flared in shock. "That information was classified." "Humans never evolved to be diplomats," Zelt commented as the treaty was signed hours later. "They evolved to hunt. They just found more efficient prey." Vraz watched the celebration unfolding across multiple worlds as news of the treaty spread. "The galaxy believes Earth maintains peace through enlightened diplomacy and moral authority." "Their greatest achievement," Zelt replied, "convincing everyone that the apex predator in the room is actually the zookeeper." As the humans departed, Blackwood paused beside Vraz. "Security Chief, one question has bothered me. How did you obtain our classified training documents?" Vraz stiffened. "Anonymous source." Blackwood nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. Those documents were created specifically for you. Strategic information released through channels you monitor. We needed someone of your reputation to verify what we wanted the galaxy to know. You wanted me to discover your true nature. We wanted you to discover exactly what we chose to reveal. Blackwood smiled one final time. After all, the most successful predator isn't the strongest or fastest. It's the one that controls what the prey believes.